Atlantic undetected. Krunker's orders were to mount an attack on British convoys in the North Atlantic, which at this time were said to be only lightly escorted due to the withdrawal of many of the Royal Navy's ships to the Mediterranean following the Italian declaration of war. HX-84 was to be Krunker's first target. For the Jervis Bay, the odds seemed insurmountable, but Edward Stephen Fogarty Fagan, descended from the Irish kings, son of an admiral, and nurtured in the fires of the Great War of 1914-18, recognized only one answer to the danger threatening. Ordering the convoy to scatter, he sent his men to their action stations and steamed straight for the Admiral Scheer, his 5.9 spitting defiance. What followed was predictable. The German guns outranged those of the Jervis Bay by nearly 7,000 yards, and the slow, high-sided British auxiliary was on fire and crippled long before she came close enough to land a shell on the Admiral Scheer. 49-year-old Captain Edward Fogarty Fagan died on the bridge of a ship with his face to the enemy. The hero of the Jervis Bay was only 4 years old when in May 1887 his father, Frederick Fogarty Fagan, was serving as a lieutenant in the screw corvette HMS Turquoise, one of the slave hunters of the Royal Navy's African Squadron. The Turquoise, armed with 12 64-pounder muzzle-loading rifles, had been assigned to patrol the east coast of Africa in the region of Zanzibar, where Arab slave traders were known to be active. On 28 May, when the Turquoise was cruising between Zanzibar and the neighboring island of Pemba, Lieutenant Fogarty Fagan was sent away in the corvette's steam pinnace with a crew of 8 and an Arab interpreter. His orders were to intercept, board, and search any Arab slaving dhows attempting to break out into the Indian Ocean by sailing north of Pemba. It was after sunset when the pinnace reached the Fundu Gap, a navigable channel favored by the dhows between Pemba's small satellite islands of Fundu and Njau. Fagan brought the pinnace to an anchor off the entrance to the gap and settled down to wait out the night. The hours of darkness passed slowly and uncomfortably. The air was hot and humid, and a heavy swell coming in from seaward had the shallow draft pinnace rolling her gunwales under. Sleep was impossible, and the dawn could not come quickly enough for Fagan and his men. Punctually as ever, the tropical sun climbed over the horizon at 6 a.m., bringing with it the first dhow heading out to sea through the Fundu Gap, her single triangular sail bellying in the early morning offshore breeze. She was obviously heavily loaded and might well be a legitimate trader with a cargo of cloves for Arabia. However, after studying her through the long glass, Fagan came to the conclusion that she was more likely to be a slaver bound for the Persian Gulf with a human cargo. He decided to investigate. The pinnace's small dinghy was lowered and manned by Frederick Russell, Turquoise's captain of the maintop, able seaman Frederick Blanchard, and an Arab interpreter, set off to intercept the dhow. Meanwhile, the pinnace, her 9-pounder gun manned and her remaining crew armed with rifles and cutlasses, stood by to give support if needed. Not that Lieutenant Fagan anticipated any serious resistance, and in any case, in his opinion, it was most unlikely that the Arabs would be armed with anything more lethal than a few old flintlock muskets and rusty swords. When the dinghy was within 100 yards of the dhow, Frederick Russell stood up in the bows and hailed her. There was no reply, and neither did the dhow shorten sail. Her deck appeared to be empty, except for the shadowy figure of a lone man at her tiller. Russell's second challenge also produced no response, and being well experienced in boarding suspect slavers, the petty officer's suspicions were thoroughly aroused. He challenged again, and this time his shout was answered by a fusillade of rifle shots fired by unseen marksmen in the dhow. Instinctively ducking to avoid the bullets whistling all around him, Russell lost his balance and fell overboard. Blanchard returned the fire with his revolver, but this prompted another hail of bullets from the Arab craft, forcing him and the interpreter to take cover in the bottom of the boat. Russell, who had meanwhile been attempting to reboard the dinghy, dropped back and swam clear, followed by another hail of bullets kicking up the water at his heels like angry hailstones. Seeing the dire plight of his boarding party, Lieutenant Fagan brought the pinnace in at full speed, aiming to put her between the Arab dhow